That's why I linked on the Patreon page. I linked directly to the university website, so people can see like, okay, it's not economics is, like you said, a wide field. So well, if you focus on microeconomics, macro is maybe not your, the field you really you really want to talk in depth about.
Yeah, I have some basic working knowledge, and I've taught principles of micro, although it's been a while. But yeah, it's not something I do day in, day out, for sure.
Well, you've heard me rant about ultra-crepidarianism for a long time. So so I guess for the audience listening, is that when you are an expert in a certain field and you assume, whether consciously or subconsciously or arrogantly maybe, that your expertise transfers to other domains, which is not the case. And there's a little bit of a pushback that I'll give myself on that one, which is that, for instance, if you are a scientist, you know the scientific method. I think there is overlap in applying it, obviously, to other fields. Doesn't mean that you will be able to do it as successfully as somebody who is clearly trained in that field and experienced. But at the very least, you should be able to follow a coherent reasoning pattern of, okay, this is what that person says on this topic. It makes sense just following the way you reason.
You might be a bit surprised, though. I mean, that would be my assumption a priori. Having worked at a university now for many years, and I'm involved with a variety of things across campus. Like, the hard science people are sometimes more often like the true believers in certain things than you would expect. So I think, I was a bit surprised by that, to be honest. So.
Wow. Yeah. Well, maybe I should say it should be that way.
It should be that way. I can agree with that.
I'm trying to steelman it, like before. So as you well know, is that I have a tendency to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, and people mistake me for just always being negative, which is by far not the case, which you also know.
Yes, definitely.
And for the audience, Eric and I go way back. We've known each other for quite a long time. I think there's a really good reason to, especially in these days, to focus on steelmanning arguments of the other side, or of whatever you're saying is the opposite of your position, just for yourself.
Oh yes, certainly.
Because it's a good practice to begin with, and also for the opposing side to just show, like, look, I'm arguing in good faith. So did I get it right when I say this is what you said, and I think this is here's an argument that makes your position perhaps even stronger. Do you agree? Yes. Fine. Now I'm going to start tearing it down if I can. So at the very least, there's almost discussion, which is in these polarized times, which is very much lacking. So I'm trying to hold myself to a slightly higher standard than usual. Obviously, being Belgian, I fail all the time. As Dr. Evil said, the frickin' Belgians. That's an Austin Powers joke for the audience, because I've noticed that my movie references, people are just like, no, Wim, you're getting old. People, they don't remember that, or they haven't seen it. So
no, it's funny. I mentioned before we started recording, later today I have to be on a panel for incoming freshmen at the university and their families, and I have a presentation, and like one of the slides I have like a Napoleon Dynamite picture with this quote about like nunchuck skills, bow hunting skills, girls like guys with good skills. And so at this point in time, I'm kind of like, all the parents in this room, you probably get this reference. The students, you may well not, but this is intro to college. All your professors are going to be older than you, so expect dated pop culture references that you won't get, and just roll with it. So
I get that all the time with my students now, is that I used to, for the longest time, when somebody moves in a disconnected way, like head first and then the upper body, or vice versa, upper body first and then the head, I would say, like, you're moving like RoboCop. And everybody who is our age, they're like, oh yeah, you can immediately see that.
Yes.
Then the Hollywood Bastards made a remake, and I haven't seen that one, but I'm guessing it doesn't move in the same mechanical way. So my movie reference is out the window. It's like, we're done.
Yep.
Nobody's getting it anymore. I'm like, dude, it's not my fault that the 80s and 90s had awesome action movies, and
no doubt.
Nowadays it's a little bit less. Not my fault. So I'm going to revert to what I know and like, even though now I tend to do some John Wick references, like when somebody does something and let's say technique and they get it wrong, and I explain them and they still don't do it. And then they do it to me, and then I counter them, and that's the reason why I could counter, because they didn't make the mistakes, and I'll just go all John Wick and say consequences. And then they still don't get it because they only remember the shooting part of John Wick.
Oh,
so.
yeah.
Anyway, we're going to stay a little bit on topic. So Eric Parsons, professor of economics at the University of Missouri, and also a Goju Ryu black belt in karate. So we're going to cover a bunch of stuff. Your martial arts background to begin with, then 2 years spending in Africa, and then we have a bunch of topics that I like to discuss when it comes to economics, which just before we start recording, we talked about is that people think it's boring. It isn't at all, and it affects your life every single day in many more ways than you think of, and it's also a huge subject. So
Yes.
I'm going to talk about that. And then eventually we're going to record the second part, which is on my Patreon, where my patrons ask questions. And I have, as always, the Patreon part has some of the best questions that I sometimes feel a little bit inadequate, that mine aren't as good. And I've got a nice list lined up for you.
Excellent.
All right, so let's get to it. So how did you get interested in martial arts?
So I think like most people who get interested in martial arts, it started when I was young and, watching movies and cartoons. I was a big comic book fan, loving Batman and so on. And so I was always kind of interested, but I grew up in very rural Missouri. I tell students my graduating class was 17 people. So it was like a town with a truck stop and a couple fireworks stands is where I went my senior year of high school. So no place I lived had a martial arts school. And then I actually went, did my college at University of Missouri as well, where I now teach. And there was a variety of martial arts clubs. My first year I was busy doing a variety of things and I didn't get a chance to participate. But the second year had a little bit more free time, and my roommate had started in the karate club here on campus. And so I wanted to do something that I felt like I'd kind of gotten a bit out of shape my freshman year, and I'd always been interested in martial arts. So I joined up with the karate club and just kind of took it from there. I loved it from the start and did that for a long time, and have done other styles as well. But that was really my start.
Is there something specific about Goju Ryu that you were attracted to?
So once again, like many people who do martial arts, it was the one that was convenient and close, and I had a friend doing it. And so, that said, I think I lucked out. I think Goju Ryu is a great martial art, and the style, and I think it's always interesting. And this is probably going way in the weeds, but it's, lots of your listeners are martial artists, so I think they'll appreciate some of this. Everyone thinks of karate as a Japanese art, but like karate's really an Okinawan art, and if you look at the history of Okinawa, for a big chunk of its history, it was as much, if not more, influenced by China than Japan. Yeah. And in fact, like the karate masters who created the styles, the vast majority of them went and trained in China and trained in Chinese art. So like original karate is more like a merging of indigenous Okinawan arts with Chinese arts. Now there's lots of debate about which specific Chinese arts everyone studied, and everyone has their own theories, right? But and so ours was like a pretty traditional Okinawan Goju Ryu style. There's also Japanese Goju Ryu as well. And so it kept a lot of the elements that got lost over time. So we always did grappling. We always did the close-in fighting. It was really not designed as a tournament style. So although it happened more just by happenstance, I think I lucked out and was able to get a start in an art that was very holistic and had all those elements with that focus on self-defense and self-protection and the traditional aspect of karate as opposed to the tournament fighting.
Yeah, I always say that, and I'm gonna make a note that I don't forget adding it. There's this video that's been online for a while now, which I think it's 4 or 5 different teachers, Goju, but I think Ishinryu as well, but I'm not sure anymore. Yeah. And then Chinese styles that are basically in many ways the parent style of those Japanese systems, and they're all doing Sanshin Kata.
Yes.
And it's
that's a great video.
Fumiya Demeere, who's like he was, doesn't get much better than that. Because I remember seeing him in that old BBC documentary, Way of the Warrior.
Oh yeah.
He was much younger than I was in the 80s or something, and he was that little guy can punch really hard.
Oh yeah.
And then you could see just see each of them do the same form one after the other. You see the nuances, the differences, and so on. There's no way of saying that that guy is right and that guy is wrong, and I think that makes the richness of a style such as Goju is that you can have all these different branches, and it can still be high quality martial arts. Definitely. So that's why I always find interesting when you look at traditional arts, is where you see that a lot of, like you said, a lot of things are kept in, the grappling is kept in, the closing fighting and so on, as opposed to styles where that is either forgotten, removed, or lost for some reason.
Yes, yeah, I think having that holistic art is really what interests me in the martial arts. I'm not super interested in tournament fighting, and never have been. So having all of those components, I think is really valuable, and it benefited my teacher's teacher was also a judo black belt, and so and actually a very very high level judo practitioner. I think that was kind of his first love, but judo is pretty brutal on the body, so it's easier to run a karate school than a judo school. So he still taught judo, and they had a judo class, but I think students came to the karate side more. So especially in the 80s after Karate Kid. So.
I've got a couple that I've been training for many years now. They have a boy, he's 7, and they asked me like, what should we teach our kid, or what kind of sports would you think would be good for him? I'm like, swimming, that's the minimum. They have a pool. Your kid needs to know how to swim as soon as possible, because he will eventually fall in the pool, or the risk of him being in the pool without your supervision is extremely high. And this is one of the leading causes of death in children under the age of, I forget which, in the United States, is drowning. And having a pool, and unfortunately I know several people who've had that happen to them, that their child or grandchild drowned in a pool or in a small fountain, stuff like that. And then I said the other thing, either gymnastics or judo. They're both great for physical development. I put my kids in gymnastics. My daughter did a little bit longer, my boy not as much, but they both had multiple years in gymnastics. And then I said, look, judo, in Belgium, because we've had a background of multiple world champions, Olympic champions and so on, the judo organization is pretty well developed, and especially for children, because they know that you need to bring them up all the way up to adulthood if you want to make champions. So it's good, the curriculum is usually good, the whole environment, they do pre-competition stuff like randori tournaments. It's not really a tournament, but get-togethers and so on, and it's well run. And he's been doing that for almost 2 years now, and he's like really enjoying it, and the parents are extremely impressed with just the quality of instruction and the discipline involved and so on. So I think if you can do judo as a kid, I did it when I was a teenager, not that long, but just a little bit. It's really helpful. To this day, Kisakatame is my favorite hold. I just defaulted just so easily.
Kisakatame is a great one, and actually I followed a pretty similar path. I have 2 sons who are 16 and 18, and the daughter, and both my sons did gymnastics when they were young, and then also did some judo, did some BJJ before eventually my younger son got into team sports, and then time was taken up with that. And I do think it's like a great progression of development, like body control. And I think another important thing you learn from judo and from gymnastics as well is just how to fall. I really think like more team sports people should study some judo and learn some ukemi. In fact, I remember there was a quarterback in American football for the Miami Dolphins who had a variety of concussion problems. And I heard in the off season he was training with some BJJ and judo people working on break falls. And I'm like, I think more American football players, more basketball players, more soccer players should spend at least a little bit of time working on that, because who better to learn to fall from than judo players? And then, once you build it into your muscle memory, when you're on the field, it just happens and you're less likely to get injured. So.
Yeah, I just, it's a funny coincidence. This weekend I did a boxing class for a professional soccer player here. And I'm still playing, still active. And he said that apparently, that I think it was in the Netherlands, because we got talking about martial arts. He said he started doing boxing when he was playing in England, and that was apparently a big thing there. A lot of players did that, especially in the off season. And apparently that in some Dutch clubs they teach judo to the players.
Very cool.
And like on a consistent basis, not just like a one-off. So I'm like, dude, there's so much overlap. There's a lot of overlap, and it's worth it.
Yeah, and I mean, boxing, like the conditioning level, the footwork, I mean, all those things are going to be valuable. So.
Yeah. Let's move a little bit to something else. You spent 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in an African country, Uganda. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit. And for the audience, you guys know that I've had several people from South Africa on. I think there's a huge benefit to traveling. I've been fortunate to do that, and a lot of people don't have that good fortune. As a result, we often have these preconceived ideas about different countries, different cultures, and so on. So that's why I want to talk about you. I've never been to Uganda, so I can't talk about that. But could you first quickly explain what is a Peace Corps and what did you do over there?
So Peace Corps, it's a U.S. government agency. It was founded in the 1960s by President Kennedy. And the Peace Corps actually has three goals. So it's an international aid organization is like one way to think about it. But it really has three goals. So the first one is kind of the development aspect, like trying to do things to help the economy, help the people of the country that you're serving in. And that's what people tend to think of when they think of Peace Corps. But there's a second and third goal, and the second and third goals are explicitly about cultural exchange. So one of them is to teach the people in the country where you're working about the United States, because they often have very, we've clearly people from the West often have misconceptions about countries in Africa, Asia, and so on. But the reverse is also certainly true. And so to teach them about a bit about the U.S. And then when you get home, the third goal is to teach people in the U.S. about the country that you were at. And so there's an explicit cultural exchange component to Peace Corps. Peace Corps volunteers, so you get paid a little bit, but you're technically considered a volunteer. And they're normally 2-year stints is the traditional Peace Corps time. And Peace Corps in a wide variety of countries all around the world.
Okay. And what was your mission in Uganda?
So my wife and I both went in together, and our primary project was we were training primary school teachers. So Uganda was the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to have universal primary education. So students could go to primary school for free. But to do that, you have to have a lot of teachers. And so they developed a system to try to train teachers pretty quickly to get them out in the field. But as you might expect with the speed of trying to build up that program, maybe the quality wasn't always there. So they were trying to boost teacher quality out in rural schools often. So my wife and I actually ended up more at what they call the in-service. So the students would go actually to a campus and learn for a couple years before they went out in the field. So I taught mathematics, my wife taught science to these people who are going to be future primary school teachers. But interestingly, like almost everyone in Peace Corps, you get like a secondary project as well, which is often self-directed, like based on the needs of the community, like after you've spent some time there. And so in Uganda also was one of the countries like worst hit by the HIV/AIDS epidemic early on. Had very, very high rates of HIV/AIDS, and so almost everyone in Uganda, whether they were in education or health, at the time we were in it, they had the two sectors in Peace Corps, education and health. Almost everyone did something with HIV prevention. So what we did was we took the Ministry of Education in Uganda had a life skills curriculum. Over time, they kind of discovered that the students, the young people, the youth in Uganda knew the specifics about how to avoid getting HIV, but they didn't have the skills necessary to avoid the risky activities. So the life skills curriculum was things like peer resistance, self-esteem, those types of components. So we took that Ministry of Education life skills curriculum and then infused it into kind of a sports activity. So I had started a karate club when I was there, and then we also got some money from Little League Baseball in the United States and kind of started some youth baseball. And we trained the college students not only in the sports and martial arts aspects, but also in this life skills curriculum and how you could infuse the two, with ultimately the goal that they would go out when they went out and became primary school teachers and at least spread parts of that to the students that they were teaching.
And what was it like living there? I mean, if you look at just like, let's say, the best part of it and the worst, not necessarily, but like some negative aspects.
So I loved our time in Uganda. In fact, my wife and I were going to extend for a third year, and then we ended up not being able to. But the people in Uganda are absolutely amazing. They are so friendly and open. The climate in Uganda, especially like the southern part of Uganda, Winston Churchill called it the Pearl of Africa for a reason. Like the scenery is beautiful and the climate's amazing. The equator goes through Uganda, but it's over a mile above sea level. So the temperatures, like the part we lived in southwestern Uganda, only about 30 miles from the Congo border, actually. And the temperature, like the highs were always, and I'm going to speak in Fahrenheit, so you'll have to translate for me, Wim, but into Celsius. But it was low to mid 70s up to low to mid 80s was the high throughout the year. I mean, it was about perfect weather. They'd have what they called a rainy season and a dry season, but it wasn't monsoon type level like you might see in India. In the rainy season, it would rain for an hour or two every afternoon, and then it would get nice again. You know, in the dry season, you'd go a week or so, and then it would rain. So, you know, it wasn't like it was, you know, parched one time of the year and you're flooded the next time. It was pretty well balanced. So the climate was beautiful. The scenery was really great. That part of southwest Uganda is called the Switzerland of Africa, so very hilly, green. And then really the best part, though, is the people. The people were amazing. And you know, we've stayed in touch with my homestay family and are still very close with them. And some of my students at the college stayed in touch with. Actually helped a couple of them go through university there, get their master's degrees, and they're now working in the field there. So, you know, the people were very amazing. As far as negative sides, transport was fun. So we lived in a village about an hour away from the regional capital, which is known as Mbadada, and for transport about, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours in that part of the country, they were taxis, I guess. They were Toyota Corolla size cars, and it was very, very common to fit 8 people into one of these cars. 4 people in the back seat, 2 in the front passenger, 2 in the front driver. And they were also all manual transmission. So you didn't want to be the one in the front driver's seat because the driver was having to reach between your legs to shift the gears. So it was crowded. The drivers often didn't pay the most attention. Oftentimes people worry about like going to a lower income country, like safety, security, and certainly some countries, no doubt that's a concern that you should have, and you should always obviously be aware of it and concerned about it. But during my time in Uganda, I never, like especially when we were in the village, I felt very safe. You know, I didn't have those types of concerns except when we were going somewhere. Those were the times I felt like today might be the day. I remember one time we were going to do our shopping. We went into that regional capital, you know, once a month or so to do shopping, every couple weeks, and someone was sitting in the driver's seat reading a newspaper. Unfortunately, the driver was reading the newspaper too. And this herd, so that part of the country is a big cattle herding region, and a big herd of cattle started crossing the road. Our driver did not see it, and he's just barreling towards it. And finally, at the last minute, he looks up and like slams on the brakes, and we survived. But there are a few times I'm like, oh, today might be the day. So.
Yeah, that's a part of you know, going to these kind of countries. I mean, I had that when I went to Bali. Just the traffic there was insane.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like a free-for-all anthill with cars and bikes and mopeds and everything. Everybody just doing like, and it works. I didn't see a single accident, but I was like, there's no way I'm driving anything here. It's like a zero chance I'm doing that. Wouldn't survive.
No, in the capital city of Uganda, I think it's changed now. I should preface everything. This was 20 years ago, and things have changed in 20 years, I'm sure. But they had 2 different taxi parks and then a bus park. And the taxi parks were they called them Mutatu in Uganda, and they were a van that was kind of licensed for 14 people. But as soon as you got out in the rural areas, they started cramming people in and got up to like 30 some. But it would just be like all packed in. Like the drivers were pretty amazing. They knew exactly how wide their vehicle was. They could fit through the tiniest spots without hitting anything. And they'd have multiple taxis that were supposed to go to one city, and one would fill up first and then it would leave, and it'd have to like wind through this crazy maze of other vans, and there's vendors running around coming up to your window with things to sell, you know, and then finally make it out on the road. And in the capital city, the traffic was crazy. Once you got out of the capital city, it tended not to be quite as bad. And then you'd have for longer haul trips, you had these big buses, and really I learned the one law of the road in Uganda is the bigger thing has the right of way, because those big buses would just barrel down the road they would pass people with oncoming traffic, and they're like, nope, they'll get out of the way. And, it was crazy at times. So
I can imagine. You also once in the past you mentioned like the dust that is everywhere.
oh
And
yes,
it's not necessarily dust per se, but it could be something else as well.
yeah, there's dust all the time. The most people have pit latrines, right? And so it's not always there's especially in certain areas there's probably some lack of sanitation and such as well. So
Yeah, it's kind of things that over here we take for granted, or stuff like running water is perfectly drinkable. It's fine. You don't have to worry about it. That's not the case everywhere at all.
not at all. And it's interesting. That was during my time in Peace Corps. So like when you go there, there's a culture shock, no doubt. But actually, most people I know had reverse culture shock was maybe a bit worse, like coming back home. Because when you go there, you know it's going to be different. So you're
Yeah.
prepared, at least to the extent that you can be. You're mentally prepared. Like it's different. I'm going to have to adapt. When you come back home, you think you're coming home, and home's home, right? But you're different. Home's different, and you've just spent 2 years living in a very different environment. And so, like one of the weirdest things that I had to adjust to coming back home was turning on a tap and just drinking the water out of the tap. So in Uganda, every day you had to devote time to getting water, boiling water, and filtering water. It was just part of your daily routine, and you just got used to it. And so the idea of turning on a tap and like getting water and drinking the water out of the tap, it was very odd coming back home for a while. It just felt weird, like it felt wrong to do it. Um, Honestly, indoor plumbing kind of felt weird. We kind of got used to having the pit latrine out in the back. That coming back home it can be a challenge.
Yeah, and again, it's like I said in the beginning, I've been very fortunate that I was able to travel a lot, especially when I was younger. I did my first trip when I was to China when I think I was 19 maybe, 18 or 19, I think 19, but I'm not sure anymore. So, and that was like 3 weeks in China, including traveling throughout the country. And that was in the early 90s, so that was a very different China than
Very
we
different
have
China
now.
back then, certainly.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, just backwater stuff, and they were maybe a century behind where I was coming from, just in pretty much everything in some of the places that we went to. And then, indeed, when you come back, you're like, oh wow, okay, we have it really good here.
It,
And that's maybe one of the biggest lessons that I always try to explain to people when we talk about traveling is if you only stay in the touristic parts, the resorts and that kind of stuff, sure, that's one thing. It's great you see something of the country, but it's once you go beyond that, or you actually live with people, just common people that live there and work there, or you spend some time in that part of the culture, that's when typically your eyes open.
no, I think traveling is hugely important to give you the perspective on where you're from. And I think a lot of the arguments and things we would have would be different if people traveled more and realized, I think we get kind of caught up in this rich country trap and, the joke of the first world problems, right? And so if you realize what non-first world problems are, then you have a different perspective on first world problems. And I think that's really important. And I love the point you make about, if you just go to the touristy places, you get a little bit, and I think that's valuable. But I'll be honest, like, I like traveling. I don't like being a tourist. Like I've always wanted to. That was one thing that was appealing about Peace Corps is going and living in the country for 2 years and like actually experiencing as much as you can as an outsider. Right? You're always a little bit of an outsider, and you're never like fully integrated. But like you get a much stronger feel for the culture. As you know, I've been to Belgium a few times, and I actually like hanging out with the people and like living more, like in an Airbnb as opposed to a hotel, and
Yeah.
do shopping and integrate with the people. I think that's where that's where the payoff is, right? And that's where the relationships happen. If there's nothing wrong with going and having a fun beach vacation and being a tourist. That has its place too. But I think like the true development happens when you go and like live in a place.
Yeah, I went to Norway last year for a week on vacation, and that is obviously a very Western country. I've been to Scandinavia to several countries there, but it was the first time in Norway. Great people, lovely country, beautiful sceneries, everything. But then it's just all these small little things.
Oh
You
yeah.
go shopping for groceries, like where do I find, the milk or skim milk or this or that? And it's like everything's different. It's just obviously the brands are different, but just the way that the store is organized, it's just small things, and then all the things are exactly the same. So again, traveling is one of the best things you can do.
Yeah, and you do have to like, like the general idea of growth, you have to move outside your comfort zone. Going and like staying for an extended time in a place that's not your home country, that's outside the comfort zone. Like I mentioned traveling to Belgium. Belgium is a very high income developed country, but like you said, it's the small differences, the things that you don't really know the rules for, right? Like I live in the U.S. Even going to like someplace like U.S. is a huge country. If I go to some cities in the U.S., it's like I don't really quite know what the rules are. Like, how do people behave in these situations here? And like the further you get away from that, the more it is. And in Belgium, almost everyone speaks English, but they're still like coming back home to a place where everyone speaks English and speaks it fluently. Like there's a stress level there that like it's a kind of low level, even if you don't realize it. So right there, doing those things, you do have to like be willing to push outside the comfort zone. But we all know that that's where growth happens. So.
And that's the thing. I'm just quickly looking it up because I tend to forget things. I visited a friend, and that was the state of Washington, close to Seattle.
Yes.
Just what is it? Olympic Park or something?
Yeah, Olympic Peninsula.
He lived there, and we stayed there, and that's just a completely different country. We drove all the way from California, from the San Francisco area, all the way up through Portland and so on. We spent like 5 seconds in Eureka. I will never go there again. That was the weirdest place ever. We saw we're walking down the street and we see one weird person after the other, a guy in all leather and just walking by. It was like, and it looked like some sort of fetish thing. And it's like, I'm fine. You do you, but that's not like common.
Yeah.
Apparently in Eureka that is the case. So we spent like the time to eat lunch and then get some coffee, like let's go before they just grab us and keep us here. And then we went all the way up north and you end up being in a completely different country. But you go there and we stayed at the guest house of our friend, which is just like this cottage next to his house, beautiful. And it was just at the edge of the national park. So he says, look, there's no locks here because A, nobody's coming here, and B, if there's a bear, that you can lock the door, it's not going to stop him. So he's going to come inside if he wants to eat you. And I'm like, thanks, dude. I didn't sleep. I mean, Peggy and we didn't sleep that first night at all. Just this feeling, this is very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'm the guy who locks the doors at night and checks windows and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, like, no, you have to abandon all hope here. It's just like, if somebody wants to come in, they will come in. Second night I slept better. I was just so exhausted. But just same thing there you prepare for winter. You make sure you've got enough firewood. You have to be able to clear your roads. You have different vehicles there than you have elsewhere. Bunch of other stuff. Going shopping, you can't just forget something and go back. It's not how it works. Toby Cowan that I've interviewed many times on the podcast. He lives in Sweden. Yeah, he says that if you don't prep for winter, you're toast. Just,
no doubt.
There's one place, the place we stayed at in Norway. The people, it was more or less in the middle of the country, so very nice, up on a mountain. But they've got a second place all the way up north in the Lofoten, and it's I think it goes to like minus 25 degrees Celsius. Like freaking freezing. You can't just go outside. It doesn't work.
Nope.
It just does not work. The door's open to the inside because if there's snow, you can't open the door. You can't push it out if you've got this huge snowfall coming. All these kind of things that we think are like okay, and over there is self-evident. So again, big fanboy of traveling and different cultures, and I mean. Sounds like you had a big, how should I put that best? Maybe a life-changing experience. Would that be fair to say?
I think that's very fair to say. I definitely my thoughts and views are certainly still colored by my time there. And like I said, I still have relationships and people who I really consider family from Uganda. So I call her my homestay mother, my homestay sister. So I very, very much a life-changing experience.
Nice. All right, we're going to skip to economics.
All right.
Switch is what I should say, not skip. So you're a professor of economics. You teach principles of microeconomics. Before we started recording, we messaged over and back, and you mentioned something that you teach, a thing called big ideas. Could you explain first what a big idea is, and maybe we can cover a few?
Yeah, so my course is Principles of Microeconomics, so it's often the first course college students take when they come to college and take an economics course. And the big ideas, and I can't say that they're mine, although they've kind of are infused across all the economics curriculum. They come from the textbook I use, which was Tyler Cowen and Alex Tabarrok. Tyler Cowen, people might have heard of him. He blogs for the New York, writes for the New York Times sometimes. He has his own blog called Marginal Revolution and so on. Alex Tabarrok does as well. So I use their textbook, and these 5 big ideas that we use in my they have 10 in their book. 5 are for microeconomics, 5 are for macroeconomics. And the microeconomics ones, the 5, they're these themes, these principles. I always teach my students it's principles of microeconomics, not memorize a bunch of facts about economics, right? So these are underlying ideas, principles, themes that we touch upon throughout the entire semester. There's not a lecture that goes by that we don't touch on at least 1, 2, sometimes more of these big ideas. And so the 2 biggest ones, and we can hit all 5 if we have time, but the 2 biggest ones in my mind are incentives matter and trade-offs are everywhere. So, and really, like as a microeconomist, I feel like that's what economists studies. Economics is kind of the study of human decision making. So incentives matter. Economics, we're a social science. We try to follow the scientific method. Studying people is harder than studying, some of the things in the hard science, but we still try to follow this idea of observe, make hypotheses, test the hypotheses, revise the hypotheses, at least in that optimal stage, right? So we think people respond to incentives. If you're wondering why people are doing a certain thing, the natural first question to ask if you're an economist is, okay, what incentives are they facing? There's probably a reason why they're doing it. Let's understand the incentives there. And then on the flip side of that, like when you think about how we apply economics to policy or just in your daily life, if you want someone to do something different, how do we change the incentives to get them to do the thing that we want them to do? And I apply this actually like in my class all the time. Every single semester I'm thinking like, okay, what are some things students are doing that I'd rather they didn't do? What are the behaviors I would prefer that they do? How can we change the incentive structure of the class to try to get them to do the things we want them to do and not to get them to do the things that we don't want them to do? So it's this idea of like how do you adapt your incentives to influence people to get them to kind of move in a way that you want to move, or at least to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think it's important. There's certainly a group of people with strong anti-economic sentiment. But I feel like, and this is no surprise in the modern public discourse, the economics that they argue against is a very strawman economics, in my opinion. Not all the time, but the vast majority of the time, they're making like these very strongman, like economics says this, and like one of the things they'll say is like, oh, economics assumes everyone's perfectly rational, and like in the base models, there's some little bit like there's oftentimes in all these things there's like a kernel of truth, right? So there's some kernel like in like the basic underlying economic models there's making that assumption, but really we as economists we know that people don't always behave rationally. In fact, there's a whole field of economics called behavioral economics that looks where people behave irrationally but in predictable ways. So like if they're irrational and it's unpredictable, then you can't really study it, right? It's just like random chance. But if like people are consistently making the same wrong, irrational decisions, you can actually kind of look in those cases. But in like traditional economics, we do kind of like our models make this underlying assumption. But really what we believe in economics is that on average, like not everyone's going to behave rationally. And there's going to, like humans are humans. There's error, there's mistakes. But on average, if you understand the incentives, on average, you're going to probably be able to predict pretty well what humans are going to do. Yeah. And so that's the key on the incentive side. And then the trade-offs, and this was one, we were texting back and forth a bit when we had Barry on because you guys were talking about this, and the Sowell quote, there is no solutions, only trade-offs. I mean, He's an economist, right? And that's another phrase we use for these are opportunity costs. So like anytime you make a decision, you are giving up something else. And so the value of that thing that you are giving up is your opportunity cost. And if we want to make good, so going back to the rational side, if we want to make good rational decisions, we have to fully understand what those opportunity costs and those trade-offs are. And so a, there's a quote about like a bad economist can only see like one link down the causal chain. Like if this happens, then this happens, and that's as far as they go. A good economist can go like 5 steps down. A great economist can go 10 or 20, right? And so it's like, okay, what am I giving up? What are the incentives? And then what are those unintended consequences? So I teach that principles of microeconomics class for undergraduate students, mostly freshmen, some sophomores. But I also teach a class at the master's level for students getting a master's of public affairs degree. And it's a very similar class, but just policy focused. And my parting words of hopefully wisdom to those students at the end of the class is, if you remember anything from this class, it's think about the law of unintended consequences. Every single policy you make, it might be designed to do one thing. There are going to be unintended consequences. Think about those, right? Recognize there are trade-offs. And I get, like, in political discussions, way too often in policy discussions, even among people who should know better, they'll push a policy and they'll only push their perceived benefits of it, and there's no discussion ever that there's a trade-off involved. There's also no discussion ever that the policy's probably not going to be implemented perfectly either. But if you don't at least acknowledge the trade-offs, then you're not, like as you mentioned, you're not having a good faith discussion, and you're not really getting anywhere. And another thing that kind of ties into that policy discussion side, and it goes back to something you mentioned when we first started talking about having like good faith debates and steel manning arguments and so on, is another thing I emphasize in the class is separating the positive versus the normative. Right? So like, normative statements are value judgment statements, and positive statements are statements that we can test. So in economics, we really try to like keep a good solid separation of those two. So when I say, and it's funny because like when you talk to people who are politically inclined, they always read things into words, and economists often are bad about communicating these things. Like they don't realize other people don't talk like economists, so they'll say things. And I'm an economist. I know exactly what they mean, but I still cringe. I'm like, oh, that's going to be interpreted wrong. Yeah. It's like you could say something like, if you raise minimum wages, it has a potential to increase unemployment. That's what basic economic theory teaches. Now, there's a lot of studies on this, so we can go into the details of the studies, probably way beyond what we want to do. But whether that's true or not, but saying that is a positive statement. It could even be false, and it's a positive statement. I'm not saying that's good or it's bad. I'm not saying that we should raise minimum wages or we shouldn't. I'm just saying if A, then B. That's a positive statement. Then when you go make policy recommendations, you're making normative statements. And the one thing I make somewhat of a joke out of in class, I'm like, I'm going to make a normative statements here. We can and should make normative statements. Like we have to, right? And if you're making decisions, if you're making policy, things like that, you have to make normative judgments. But if you can separate when I'm saying like if A then B from when I'm like, okay, now you should do this, those are completely separate ways of thinking. Yeah. And if we can keep those separate, we can have more productive debates, right? Like, can we agree on the positive statement? Maybe, maybe not. Like the evidence, maybe you don't agree with that positive statement, but then we can talk about the evidence, and it's not like a personal attack. Like, oh, I've seen these studies that show when you raise minimum wage, it doesn't increase unemployment, because there are some studies that show that, and then there's others that do, and we can weigh that, but it's not a personal attack. I'm weighing the evidence to say, okay, what does the evidence support on this positive statement? And then once we kind of agree there, then we might completely disagree on the normative statement. Even if we completely agree on our like positive underpinnings, we might disagree on the normative statement, but I recognize it's like you're weighing something slightly differently, right? Or something like that. Yeah. Like there's a bit of a value judgment aspect there. So we understand where we're coming from if we can keep those two things separate. And so that's another thing I try to, it's not necessarily one of the big ideas, but it's kind of this underpinning when we're trying to think economically, we're trying to be clear-headed and rational and keep those two things separate.
Yeah, I've few things that come to mind. I used to listen a lot to the Freakonomics podcast, which I thought was great, and that was one of the themes, and I'm going to add that to the show notes, is that they constantly said is that people react to incentives.
Yep.
Because that was basically the whole thing of everything that they talked about, is that you do, like you say, you do A, you get B.
Yep.
And what I've been complaining about, for several years now is, and I've started, making this quip basically where I say like having the skill to consider second and third order consequences is almost like a superpower nowadays, because we live in such polarized times. And like you said, you know, when we just look at a positive statement and then go to the normative, you first go look at what is called hard facts. That, and we can discuss them. Like you said, you can grab two studies and they seem to be saying the polar opposite. Awesome, let's discuss. But then when we talk about, well, we should do X, Y, and Z, that is a completely different discussion, and both sides can have valid points. But if you cannot understand that, look, there's a cliche example that is often given, but I think it's still good. Is that I think it was in India where they had too many, what is it, cobra snakes or something.
Yes. That's a classic example.
They incentivized the citizens to catch snakes. So that for every snake you get, I don't know how much money you get. So at first it was really good, but then all of a sudden it turns out that it was costing quite a penny, and the number of snakes didn't go down. Why? Because people were actually breeding snakes to sell
so they
to, I think it was the government. And at the end of it, then they discontinued that program, and then they had more snakes than they had in the beginning.
Yeah.
So people, incentives, and then if you just look, we give money, they kill snakes, solution, we're done. As opposed to second order consequences, third order consequences, that's where policy often fails, and the political playground has very different rules than the scientific one, or just honest discourse. I mean, just good faith arguing in politics is so excessively rare that it's like a unicorn, and that's normal. That's in their field. That's how the game is played. But you create policies that in the end are just unworkable, or backfire so tremendously that you're like, what did you think you would achieve? So we have several governments in Belgium, long story. The Flemish government, I think it was last year, they decided that they would spend €500,000 on making a cooking app that would be free for all citizens. They discontinued it, I think, a few weeks ago. It's gone now. $500,000 through the window. Now, we have the Public Broadcasting Corporation, VRT, over here in Belgium, which is funded by taxpayers. And for, I want to say at least 10 years, could be longer, there's basically now a celebrity cook who the program is called dagelijkse kost, which would be daily fare, daily food. So just cooking typical Belgian stuff that you can make. He is doing that show almost every single day. It's like 10, 15, whatever minutes. You see him do everything, he explains everything. There's a website run by the same broadcasting corporation where you see the video, where you see the ingredients, you see the explanation, and it's free. It's already paid for by the taxpayer. No, we need a separate app to do that. So somebody got rich of that. And what we have now, because we also live in polarized times here, is that this has been going the rounds now online, that it's been cancelled and people are angry. It's like, you don't have money for healthcare, but you have money to throw away for this stupid app that nobody needed, because we have that guy doing this for years for free already with our taxpayer money. What is going on? So the like you said, people, incentives, and then the trade-offs. I think as you know, I've been ranting on Patreon a lot about that as well. Is that there's always trade-offs. You don't get to choose the trade-offs.
No, you don't. That they're going to happen. Those unintended consequences happen. I love the story of the snakes in India. That's a classic one. The textbook. So this is a case where like economics was used in a positive way to get a good outcome. This is an example from the textbook I use in my class, and it was back when the UK was shipping prisoners to Australia, and so early on those prison ships, the death rate was like super high. It was like 30-some%. 1 out of 3 prisoners was dying on the way there, and it actually caused like a big public outrage in the UK. Ministers gave sermons about it. It was in like there were newspaper editorials and so on. These people were criminals, but they weren't given a death sentence, but really 1 out of 3 of them were, because they never made it there. They made one simple change to the economic system and almost completely solved the problem. The death rate dropped from 30-some% down to 1%. And the one simple change was, initially they were paying the prison ship captains by how many prisoners got on the ship. So now they have incentives to put as many people on there as possible, and maybe not enough food, not enough water, and so on. The simple change they made was they started paying them by how many prisoners made it there to the other side alive. right? And so there's still an incentive to put a decent number on your ship. You want to get a decent number there so you can get paid when they get there, but you want to make sure they get there alive, right? And that there's like a quote from the time that like economy beat sentiment and benevolence, right? Like just this simple economic change. When you understand incentives, it's like, oh yeah, that's obvious that should happen. And it's talking about the app and a variety of these kind of wasted funds and policy. We have a political economy chapter in my class where we talk about, why do governments sometimes fail too, right? Like, we talk about markets and when do markets work, when do markets fail, and then we talk about government failure as well. And one of the key aspects we talk about is this idea of diffuse cost concentrated benefits, or special interest groups, right? So if there's a policy that benefits a very, very small group, but the costs of the policy are spread out amongst a lot of people, that policy has a very good chance of getting passed, because the people who benefit are going to lobby hard to get that policy in place, and they're going to make sure it stays in place. There's tons of examples of this I can give in U.S. policy. The costs are diffused, so like the people who are paying the fee, the taxpayers, one, they may not know, because another thing we talk about in that chapter is what's called rational ignorance. So rational ignorance is this idea. It almost seems like an oxymoron, right? Like, how can it be rational to be ignorant about something? But actually, we do it all the time, because to gain knowledge is costly. This is another idea. It's big idea number 3 in this case, right? Trade-offs are everywhere. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes cost to get information. So if the benefit that you get from the information is less than the cost of getting the information, it's perfectly rational not to get that information in the first place. We don't worry about it so much with consumers, because when consumers do research on a product, they get the benefit of that research, right? Like, if I know that this is the best car for me and I have the money to buy the car, I get the benefit of my research. But for voting, that's not true. I can be the most informed voter in the world. My vote counts the same as my neighbor who believes every conspiracy theory online, right? So like in the public sphere, we have a lot of rational ignorance. So the voters may be ignorant of this policy that's going to cost them some. But even if they know about it, the cost is so small, it's not worth it's rational not to fight it. The example in the U.S. that I give is, and most people don't know this, even in the United States, we basically have a sugar quota. We block the imports of sugar from other countries. And as a result, the wholesale cost of sugar is roughly double in the United States as it is in the world. And so when you visit the United States, I don't know if you notice, but like if you drank like a soda or something like a Coke, the second ingredient is normally high fructose corn syrup, not sugar. In every other country in the world, it's sugar. The reason why is sugar is expensive in the United States, and then on the flip side, we also subsidize corn production, which leads to more high fructose corn syrup. So high fructose corn syrup is artificially cheap, and sugar is artificially expensive. So this policy blocking sugar imports in the United States, it benefits around 3,000 to 4,000 sugar farmers in the U.S. So there's not very many sugar farms. They get a huge benefit from this, and in fact, they're the biggest agricultural lobby in the United States, even though there are way fewer sugar farmers than corn farmers, beef farmers, and so on. It's precisely because they're small and they get such a concentrated benefit that they spend so much money lobbying. If you look at the cost to consumers, it averages out to, depending on how exactly you want to count who's paying for it, about $10 to $20 a person. Right, so I always ask my students, like, first thing I ask them, like, okay, how many of you knew about the sugar quota before this lecture? 1 or 2 know about it, right? So that's rational ignorance. Most people don't even know about it. Okay, now all of you know about it. How many of you are so pissed off that you're going to start a campaign to end the sugar quota? No one raises their hand. I'm like, and it's rational for you not to do that. It's going to take way more than $10 to $20 a year of your time and money to try to fight this, and you probably still won't be successful, right? And so that's why some of these policies get put in place, is the people who are paying the cost don't know about the policy, and the cost is so spread out. Even if the total cost can be huge, if you spread it out over 100 million voters, the cost per person is small.
Yeah, I think that's also one of the reasons why it's so difficult to change something in a society, especially if government has certain policies and laws and tariffs and all kind of things in effect, is that, like you said, if the cost is spread out to such a degree that you're like, oh, it's $10, what is $10 for me? Do I really want to go through all the trouble to this and that? Let's say it's 100. Let's say $100, But you add all these up, and you get to a quite high amount then.
Yeah, if you think of that policy about the sugar quotas, the cost of the U.S. economy is like double the benefit to the farmers. So it's like a very net negative on the economy as a whole. But that benefit is concentrated amongst a small number of people, so they're going to lobby to keep it. And there's so many policies. If you look at them, like, this policy doesn't make any economic sense. Why are we doing it? So often you can go back to this like special interest group, diffuse cost, concentrated benefits idea. It pops up all the time.
Well, and that brings me to a question I wanted to ask, is that this is a good example of if you could give another one, is what would be like maybe an unexpected or a surprising way in which economics influences the daily life of just the average citizen?
So it's a great question. It's actually kind of a hard question because it's so much. Like it really is. Like one thing I try to teach my students, like people come in to the class often thinking economics is about money and banking, finance. That's like a sliver of economics, and I actually kind of find that part boring myself. So that's not the part that I'm interested in. But economics is like happening around you all the time, even if you don't realize it. And so like one example I give early on is this idea of comparative advantage. And this is one of the interesting economic ideas that's not necessarily intuitive. So it's a theory of trade. And the non-intuitive part is I can be better at you than, or you better than me at multiple things, and it still might it makes sense for you to hire me to do some of those things, even if you're like actually better at it than I am, because you're even better at some other stuff, right? And so you can apply that to your household decision making. Maybe one person in the household is better at like both cooking and dishes, but if they're even better at cooking, let them cook and the other person does the dishes, right? And that actually frees up time for you, like you have more leisure time, more family time together, and so on. So like if you look at this idea of trade-offs and incentives, you're going to notice it's happening all the time, right? Like almost everything that you do. I often encourage my students like, hey, you should study economics. And I'm like, are you going to have a job in the future where you might want to incentivize people to get them to do what you want to do? Probably, or at least you hope to, right? 2, are you going to have a job that's going to involve making decisions where you have scarce resources? If you answered yes to either of those questions, understanding economics can be useful. And so it really is just infused throughout our daily lives, even if we are oblivious to it, right? It's kind of like you said, it's going to happen. The economics is happening whether you realize it or not. So,
and it's also, it made me think of that scene in The Devil Wears Prada, where Meryl Streep basically chastises the Anne Hathaway character, because Anne is like kind of like smirking and laughing when it was something about color, and it's not blue, it's chartreuse, or it's whatever.
Yeah.
She's like, whatever. And then Meryl Streep just like, oh, you think this is funny? This doesn't involve you, right? Because this crappy sweater that you have. Okay, well, let me tell you. And then she's talked like, so many years ago, Oscar de la Renta, or one of the big designers, made out this whole season of blah 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 clothes, and this happened and that color and yada yada yada. And then he goes to that store, and then eventually the big chains copy those designs, and then that. And eventually he says, and when you the whatever secondhand store that you pulled this out of a box somewhere, that's basically what you're wearing, and that color was decided right here in my office. So how everything can be connected and trickles down, and that there was an incentive to like, okay, she doesn't. So the Meryl Streep character, she didn't want that; she wanted this, and then everybody else down that chain of consequences ends up eventually with whatever she wanted. So that kind of ties in with what you said about it might be a very small group that wants certain things and gets it, and if the cost is then divided throughout a large number of people, not much will change. Well, the opposite is also true, is that it might influence a whole lot of people.
Oh yeah, I describe, we have one of the chapters in my class, it focuses on like the ideas of Frederick Hayek and the idea of prices as signals, right? And so prices are these kind of amazing things that they have kind of 3 components. They gather information. So like every price comes together when you think like the basic supply and demand model. Well, the supply curve is all the sellers, producers, potential producers in the market are represented in the supply curve. The demand curve is represented by all the buyers and potential buyers in the market. So the price is actually capturing information from every buyer, potential buyer, seller, potential seller in the market. So a price has all of this information. And then it's a signal. It signals that information out. So anyone can see that price, and when it's going up or down, you get a feel for what's happening in that market. And then, once again, incentives matter. Big idea number 1. it incentivizes you to act. If prices go up and you're a consumer, you want to buy less, right? If you're a producer, you want to produce more. If you're an entrepreneur, you want to develop a new product because you can get into that market and undercut their price, right? So when prices change, people act. And the market then is this giant web of markets that are linked by prices. And you just like any web, you pull on one web, other parts of the web are going to move, right? And so like one price can change and other things that you would never expect to happen as a result of that one price change. Like for example, the housing crisis in the U.S. I didn't know this before I taught the class, but like dairy farmers in the U.S. use sawdust as a bedding for their dairy cattle, right? So we have a housing crisis. Suddenly we're not building houses, so there's not as much sawdust. Sawdust is more expensive. So now one of the inputs of making milk gets more expensive. So when you go to the supermarket, milk's more expensive than it was. And the thing is, and I joke with the students, like no one, in like 2008 went to the supermarket and was like, God damn this housing crisis, it's raising the price of milk. The beautiful thing about the market and prices is you don't have to know what the chain is to know, oh, milk's more expensive. Maybe I economize and use that scarce resource a bit more sparingly, right?
Yeah.
And so like everything is connected, and like that example you gave from the movie, like everything's connected and it just moves down the line. One price changes, all other markets move, or lots of other markets move, even ones you would never predict ahead of time.
And we definitely lived through that, when COVID happened, especially the first year, 2020, is that all of a sudden everything was breaking down and all these logistical chains that were affected, and not just logistical chains, but also just the interactivity between what we would think is totally different sectors. There was at a certain point the shortage of chicken meat in the UK, that this chain restaurant had to close down basically because they couldn't get it, and that had to do with, I think it was a petrochemical company, and one of their byproducts was CO2, if I'm not mistaken, and you needed that for processing the chicken meat.
Yep.
So we don't have it cheap enough anymore, and the only reason we can get it cheap because they don't make that. It's a byproduct. It's basically waste for that petrochemical plant. So like, we don't know what to do with this. Do you guys want it? You need that? Okay, we'll sell it for you cheaper than if you get it elsewhere. Awesome, we both win. All of a sudden, can't get it cheap. All of a sudden, your whole economic model crashes, and then you have one solution: go bankrupt, or we stop for now.
Yeah.
We try to ride this wave out and hope for better times, and hope we have enough cash flow that we can generate so we don't go under.
No, it's true, and that's a great example. And it often takes that crisis when things start breaking down, like people recognize, oh man, all these other things were so important that I didn't even realize were happening. Yeah.
The different question, and if you could just give a little bit of an idea, doesn't have to be in extreme detail, but the whole idea of supply and demand. Are there any misconceptions that you think you can clear up, and then maybe give a better explanation, that people think that they understand supply and demand, but that they're often wrong?
So supply and demand, economics tends to be mathematical and graphical, and so, kind of say X marks the spot, right? So you have the demand curve is all the buyers and potential buyers. The supply curve is all the sellers, potential producers. And what I like to think about it, though, is a simplified way of thinking about it. So like in the traditional model, demand's downward sloping. That's what we call the law of demand. As prices go up, consumers buy less. That's fairly intuitive. Supply tends to be upward sloping. There are some interesting counter examples of that, but most of the time supply is upward sloping. Prices go up, people want to sell more. But the way I think that makes the most intuitive sense, and I've actually explained it to my sons when they were younger this way, is just think of, so supply and demand determines prices in a competitive market. So we often think that prices are kind of set by the business person. In some cases that's true, but a lot of times the prices are really just set by the market, and the business owners accept them, right? And that's what we think of as a competitive market, right? And so in these competitive markets, it's really like, how many buyers do you have and how many sellers do you have? The buyers are the demand, the sellers are the supply. So if you have more buyers, that's going to bid a price higher because more people want that product, and they're going to auction that price higher. They're going to push that price higher. On the flip side, the more sellers you have, well, now there's plenty of the product, and so the price is going to go down. And so it's really, if you just kind of think of like the number of buyers and the number of sellers in the market and how they balance out, because that's the idea of the equilibrium price. Is the equilibrium is where we think like the price is going to settle, all else equal, right? And so over time the price will settle at that equilibrium. Now supply and demand are always moving, so there's a quote, I'm not a huge Keynesian, but I do like this quote from John Maynard Keynes that says, in the long run we're all dead, right? So like we never fully reach equilibrium. But the idea of equilibrium is the quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal. So the number of buyers and the number of sellers are the same. So why does price settle there? It's of all possible prices, the equilibrium price is the one price where every buyer who wants to buy at that price can find a seller willing to sell at that price. And every seller who wants to sell at that price can find a buyer willing to buy at that price. So you balance the market and all the matches are made. Everyone's satisfied. If the price is above that equilibrium, you have more sellers than you have buyers. Well, if you're a seller and you have product that you're not selling, the natural first, big idea number one, incentives matter, right? The natural first inclination is to, I'm going to lower my prices so I can sell my product. That pushes you down to equilibrium. If the price is below equilibrium, you have more buyers than there are sellers. So now if I'm a seller, I'm selling all my product, and I got people will still line up out the door wanting to buy it, and I'm out. Like, oh, I can raise my prices and then still sell. And there's incentives on the buyer side too. Like if you're a high-value consumer who really needs this product, you might go to the seller and say, hey, you're going to run out. Sell it to me, I'll pay you more because I really need it, right? And so both buyers and sellers have an incentive to push that price up towards the equilibrium. At the equilibrium, everything's in balance, and so you don't have those pressures to move the price up or down. It's kind of like musical chairs. When you get to equilibrium, every player has a chair, so it all works out. So that's really what the supply and demand model is the simplest way to think about it. Is you have buyers on one side, sellers on the other, and the price moves to get those deals happening. So every match can be made.
Right, and there's a different one that I wanted to hear your side of it. Is I've been using that in when I teach MMA, and then basically it applies to all combat sports where you have leading, lagging, and real-time indicators. Which is a concept that is very difficult sometimes to understand for people. Again, because we get back to consequences and second and third order consequences. Is that a good one, a classic one? I guess it's true in the US as well, but over here it's like when the housing market goes down, 6 to 12 months later, retail goes down. Yeah. Because people don't buy washing machines and dryers and appliances and so on. So we know that if less houses are being built, eventually the retail stores are going to get hit. If they get hit, eventually they have to, again, lower prices, do a bunch of stuff, and start laying off people, and that then has this consequence and so on. So I use it in MMA, for instance. You can look at fights. You can look at careers of MMA fighters. Good example is Anderson Silva, one of the legends in MMA. You could predict certain things, like from what you've seen him do in the past. He's probably going to fight that guy and do this and that. So that is an indicator that gives you information ahead of time of the event.
Yes.
You have real time. You watch the fight. You see what he's doing. It's like he's gonna knock him out. I'm for sure he's gonna knock him out. I see he has his timing and so on. But then you have indicators that you can look at. It's like, what is this going to lead up to in the future? And for example, he broke his shin bone throwing a leg kick when his opponent blocked it, and his shin was just cut in half. So what Conor McGregor had something similar. Chris Weidman, the guy who blocked Anderson Silva's kick, did the same thing. He had, yes. So that's a funny coincidence. Well, not so funny. Less for them,
funny for him, yeah.
That means you get a metal rod in your shin bone, and it's a long, grueling process of recovery. Neither Weidman nor Silva were ever the same fighter afterwards.
No.
So we know that. We know if this happens, he is extremely unlikely in 6 to 12 months time when he's going to come back, if he comes back at all, to be the same fighter. So you can adapt your strategy and so on using the different kinds of indicators that either are ahead of time, real time, or behind in time of whatever event that we're talking about. Does that make sense on an economic level, or could you add a little bit to that?
No, and I think like people are always trying to find those indicators for the economy. And the problem is it's really hard. There's a joke that like economists have predicted 9 out of the last 5 recessions, right? So like everyone's always trying to find these indicators that like we can predict where the economy's going, and there's a theory. It's really from finance, but it can be applied more broadly in economics, called the efficient market hypothesis. I teach this to my students when we're talking about like investing strategy. Interestingly enough, when like you tell people you're an economist, like the first question you almost always get asked is like, do you have any stock advice? And I'm like, that's not really what I do. But the efficient market hypothesis says all publicly available information is captured in the price already. It's already baked in. So you can't beat the market. Is essentially, unless you have insider information, you can't beat the market. Now, I think it's interesting. Some people, once again, the straw man arguments that get made, like people will say that the efficient market hypothesis is saying that the market's always correct. That's actually not what it's saying. If the market doesn't have all the available information, it won't be correct. It's just saying that if the market has the information that's publicly available, it's baked in. And it actually like is a really nice follow-up to this idea of supply and demand, because the intuition of the efficient market hypothesis makes a lot of sense when we understand this idea of equilibrium. So for any person who's selling a stock, there has to be a buyer, right? So that's the idea of equilibrium. So anyone who's selling a stock thinks the price is going to go down. Anyone who's buying the stock thinks the price is going to go up. Otherwise, they wouldn't be making those choices. So unless one group has more information than the other, why would we think that one group is going to be correct more often than the other? And so, and this has been studied a lot in financial markets. You can't beat the market. They're like people who say they can beat the market. There've been lots of studies. They've thrown darts at newspapers, and that portfolio does just as well. Warren Buffett is often one that people get brought up as a counterexample, like, oh, Warren Buffett beat the market so many years. Warren Buffett actually made a bet. They have these big meetings of his company, Berkshire Hathaway. He made a bet. He said, all you hedge fund managers, I'm going to invest $1 million in the most boring investment possible. We're going to do the Vanguard 500. It's like the Standard & Poor's 500 index, the very first index fund. I'm going to put $1 million in that and wait 10 years. You can invest in anything that you want, and we're going to see who made more money after 10 years. Only one hedge fund manager took him up on the bet, and it was a blowout. Like the Vanguard 500 made like 7% returns a year, which means you double your money every 10 years. The hedge fund manager made 2% return. It's like 35 years. It wasn't even close. So even Warren Buffett said essentially, some of his public statements might suggest otherwise, but that bet indicates he kind of believes in efficient markets, right? So at least in financial markets, that's true. And then when you think of the economy as a whole, this goes back to this idea from Hayek, like everything's interrelated. It's so hard to like. I actually think that the economy is a lot like the human body. We're getting better at understand. The human body is a really complex system, and we're slowly getting better at understanding how it works. And if you do this, this happens. But we're not very good yet. I think in like 100 years they'll look back at like, oh my God, what are the things that was medicine back then? The economy, I think, to say it's like a very complex system. We don't understand exactly. We're getting better over time at understanding. I think at the micro level we understand a lot better because we have millions and billions of observations. At the macro level it's much harder. And so we don't really understand it that well, and it's hard to predict. So we wanted things to like lead to other things, but it doesn't always happen that way. There's one of my favorite quotes from Friedrich Hayek, and this will be a paraphrase because I can never get it exactly right, but it says, the curious task of economics is to convince men how little they understand about what they think they can design. And this goes back to the policy thing too. Policy people think they can design these things that will fix all problems. We don't really understand how, like we don't, even a brilliant person, like, the third, fourth order consequences, you can see maybe 3-4 links down the chain, but there's 10 links in the chain. It's so hard to see those unintended consequences, and we have to be aware of that. Now, does that mean we should never make policies, economic policies? No, of course not. But we have to understand that there are trade-offs, there are consequences, and we have to do our best to try to weigh the costs and benefits, knowing that we're not going to make a perfect judgment, right? But if we ignore all those things, we're never going to make a good judgment, or we might stumble on it once in a while, right? Like a broken clock's correct twice a day. So
that makes sense. Two things I want to say about that. So first one, there is absolutely a way to beat the market. You have to be Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, no, that
because
insider knowledge,
her stock
non-public
trades
information.
because she made there's a Twitter or like X account I have to call like unusual whales, and they follow her, and it's hilarious sometimes. I mean they are political, so be warned. But I think they started initially as just basically tracking her and then fellow politicians who got insanely rich in an ungodly short amount of time. But where like this is impossible to do. Nancy Pelosi is a much better investor than Berkshire Hathaway. Anybody there sucks in comparison to her. She's awesome.
No, and it's interesting. Some like mutual funds have started making index funds based on the trading of senators and representatives, which I actually kind of like. It shows a little bit of this efficiency of markets, right? Like when people become aware of it and start trading on it, then it doesn't work quite as well, right? And so, but yeah, if you have insider knowledge, you can beat the market if you have insider knowledge, no doubt about that. So.
And what you said about how it's all connected is many years ago I wrote an article on my blog, a blog post about that, about how to keep on learning, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And my buddy, the rocket scientist, said I can live with your explanation. So I talked about emergent dynamic systems.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of dynamic systems is there are a bunch of factors that interact with each other. And there are rules that you can figure out, and there's ways to predict certain things. This is more likely, this is not. But there's just so many elements in there that it becomes very complex. Like you said, the economy, human body, same thing. Just things can interconnect in unexpected ways and have unexpected results. The emergent part is that you can devise those rules and give an explanation. Well, this is why that happened afterwards, not beforehand. So, and the example I use is violence. I can show you a video and then pause it at a certain point, and you can say like, okay, what do you think is going to happen? And you and I will say, they're going to fight. That guy's going to throw a punch. Could be a kick, could be a push. Could be that the other guy throws a punch first. Could be that he steps back and takes some distance, or puts his hands up and says, "Do that, I don't want to fight." Could be a bunch of things. But we, from having experienced and seen and studied violence, we can then deduce certain variables that seem to be coming back all the time. Have these frames that we use, or theories that we have according to our experience and knowledge of violence, and then have a reasonably accurate model of predicting things. Like if these and these and these factors are present, the likelihood of you getting sucker punched in the next few seconds is extremely high. Take a step back, or hit the guy first with whatever you want to do. But it's the emergent part is important in the dynamic system. The systems are complex, difficult to predict, but the true analysis can always only be done afterward. And I think with markets and economics, it's pretty much the same thing.
Very, very much true. And I think I think it's been said before too that economics is much better at explaining things than predicting things. It's just exactly that idea, right? Like if you can go back, we can like trace the path that led us to where we are. It's much harder because of all those variables, some of which we don't even observe, right? That it's difficult to predict.
It's got to be really difficult to be a high-profile economics guy, whether it's professor or analyst or whatever, because we have one here, Paul de Grauwe, who I think is like London School of Economics or something trained, and he has been saying for years that no, we can having a debt is perfectly fine. We have to spend a lot of money, and now that the public debt in Belgium is extremely high and we don't have money for anything anymore. Now it's like it's just that is kind of an issue. And everybody's like, dude. For years, you said that debt was not a problem, perfectly fine. Go in debt, do it now. And now you're like, we shouldn't have done that. So it, like you said, predicting afterwards is a thing to do. But that's why I'm always careful with absolutist statements. Where it's like, this is the way, this is the only way, and there is no other way, and I'm sure of it. It's kind of hard. I'm lucky in that when I started writing with Lauren Christensen, he said you want to avoid saying stuff like always and never, because you were never there when every single fight happened throughout history on this planet. So there's no way you can say never or always or all these absolute statements. And that was like over 20 years ago. So that had a huge influence on me. So that I looked a lot more for the nuances, for the systems that explain things, and this idea of that, okay, do the analysis afterwards and see what you can learn, understanding full well that the next situation can and most likely will be radically different despite the similarities. So. And then we get to, you know, my phrase of Randy's law: the similarities are just, the differences are just as important as the similarities.
Yes.
So all that kind of jazz. We're at about an hour 20, so we got to be mindful of your time as well, because you have a fun panel to attend to in a little bit. Before we get to the second part on Patreon, anything you want to share?
Covered a lot of ground. I think we did a lot of good stuff. There's always more, right? So I guess, you know, maybe we have to have another conversation in the future. But yeah, we didn't even, you know, I figured there'd be some talk of trade policy and, you know, those types of things that are in the news a lot. So.
Oh yeah, maybe we can do that. Let's do that next time. You know,
okay.
Just rip into the politicians and see why they're full of it. It would be nice if you looked at some of the Belgian policies as well. Then I can say, like, look, folks, it's not me saying, it's my friend, the professor. We're going to head on over to Patreon. So, folks, my podcast and everything I do online is supported by my patrons, of which Eric is one of them, which I'm very grateful for. And one of the perks you get is that you can ask my patrons questions. My guests, sorry, you can ask them questions for the bonus part. This is typically a wild segment where things go all over the place, and we at least I do a lot of swearing, which I try to avoid a little bit in the main segment. So join us there. It's cheap. You get access to a library of, this is the 7th year, so there's literally hundreds and hundreds of videos, instructional stuff, unique content you can't get anywhere else. And then you support my guests coming on the show, and the show grows, and then I can get even, you know, more guests, and that's the fun part for me and hopefully for you guys as well. So join us there, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.